dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. Tonight we are going to be reading 2 more chapters of Emily of New Moon. We are able to do this thanks to Project Gutenberg, which is a website that accumulates all these stories once they reach a certain age and they become public domain. So let's hop on into this with chapter 17. And chapter 17 is called Living Epistles. Dear Father, I have such an exciting thing to tell you. I have been the heroine of an adventure. One day last week, Ilsa asked me if I would go and stay all night with her because her father was away and wouldn't be home till very late. And Ilsa said she wasn't frightened, but very lonesome. So I asked Aunt Elizabeth. I could hardly dare hope, dear Father, that she would let me, for she doesn't approve of little girls being away from home at night, but to my surprise she said yes. And I could go, very kindly. And then I heard her say in the pantry to Aunt Laura that it's a shame the way the doctor leaves that poor child alone at nights. It's wicked of him, and Aunt Laura said the poor man's warped. You know, he was not a bit like that before his wife. And then just as it was getting interesting, Aunt Elizabeth gave Aunt Laura a nudge and said, "Shh, little pitchers have big ears." And I knew she meant me, though my ears are not big, only pointed. I do wish I could find out what Ilsa's mother did. It worries me after I go to bed. I lie awake forever so long thinking about it. Ilsa has no idea. Once she asked her father, and he told her in a voice of thunder never to mention that woman to him again. And there is something else that worries me too. I keep thinking of Silas Lee, who killed his brother at the well. How dreadful the poor man must have felt, and what it is to be warped. I went over to Ilsa's and we played in the garret. I like playing there because we don't have to be careful and tidy like we do in our garret. Ilsa's garret is very untidy and can't have been dusted for years. The tag room is worse than the rest. It's boarded off at one end of the garret, and it's full of old clothes bags and bags of rags and broken furniture. I don't like the smell of it. The kitchen chimney goes up through it and things hang around it, or did. For all this is in the past now, dear Father. For when we got tired playing, we sat down on an old chest and talked. This is splendid in daytime, I said, but it must be awful weird at night. Mice, said Ilsa, and spiders and ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts, I said scornfully. There isn't any such thing. But maybe there is for all that, dear Father. I believe this garret is haunted, said Ilsa. They say garrets always are. Nonsense, I said. You know, dear Father, it would not do for a new moon person to believe in ghosts, but I felt very weird. It's easy to talk, said Ilsa, beginning to be mad, though I wasn't trying to run down her garret. But you wouldn't stay here alone at night. I wouldn't mind it a bit, I said. Then I dare you to do it, said Ilsa. I dare you to come up here at bedtime and sleep here all night. Then I saw it was in awful shape. Then I saw I was in an awful scrape, dear Father. It's a foolish thing to boast. I knew not what to do. It was dreadful to think of sleeping alone in that garret, but if I didn't, Ilsa would always cast it up to me whenever we fought. And worse than that, she would tell Teddy, and he would think me a coward. So I said proudly, I'll do it, Ilsa Burnley, and I'm not afraid to either, but oh, I was inside. The mice will run over you, she said. Oh, I wouldn't be you for the world. It was mean of Ilsa to make things worse than they were, but I could feel she admired me too, and that helped a great deal. We dragged an old feather bed out of the rag room, and Ilsa gave me a pillow and half her clothes. It was dark by this time, and Ilsa wouldn't go up to the garret again, so I said my prayers very carefully, and then I took a lamp and started up. I'm so used to candles now that the lamp made me nervous. Ilsa said I looked scared to death. My knees shook, dear Father. But for the honor of the stars and the Murrays too, I went on. I had undressed in Ilsa's room, so I got right into bed and blew out the lamp, but I couldn't go to sleep for a long time. The moonlight had made the garret look weird. I don't know exactly what weird means, but I feel the garret was it. The bags and old clothes hanging from the beams looked like creatures. I thought I need not be frightened. The angels are here, but then I felt as if I would be as much frightened of angels as of anything else. And I could hear rats and mice scrambling over things. I thought, what if a rat was to run over to me? And then I thought, that next day I would write out a description of the garret by moonlight and my feelings. At last I heard the doctor driving in, and then I heard him knocking around in the kitchen, and I felt better. And before very long I went to sleep, and I dreamed a dreadful dream. I dreamed the door of the rag room opened and a big newspaper came out and chased me all around the garret. And then it went on fire, and I could smell the smoke plain as plain, and it was just on me when I screamed and woke up. I was sitting right up in bed, and the newspaper was gone, but I could still smell smoke. I looked in the rag room, and smoke was coming out under the door, and I saw firelight through the cracks of the boards. I just yelled at the top of my voice and tore down to Ilse's room, and she rushed across the hall and woke her father. He said, "Damn," but he got right up, and then all three of us kept running up and down the garret stairs with pails of water. And we made an awful mess, but we did get the fire out. It was just the bags of wool that had been hanging close to the chimney that had caught fire. When all was over, the doctor wiped the perspiration from his manly brow and said, "That was a close call." A few minutes later, it would have been too late. I put on a fire when I came in to make a cup of tea, and I suppose those bags must have caught fire from a spark. I see there's a hole here where the plaster has tumbled out. I must have this whole place cleaned out. How in the world did you come to discover the fire, Emily? "I was sleeping in the garret," I said. "Sleeping in the garret," said the doctor. What were you doing there?" "Ilse dared me," I said. "She said I'd be too scared to stay up there, and I said I wouldn't. I fell asleep and woke up and smelled smoke." "You little devil," said the doctor. I suppose it was a dreadful thing to be called a devil, but the doctor looked at me so admiringly that I felt as if he was paying me a compliment. He has a weird way of talking. Ilse says it's only time he ever said a kind thing to her was once when she had a sore throat, and he called her a poor little animal and looked as if he was sorry for her. I feel sure Ilse feels dreadfully bad because her father doesn't like her, though she pretends she doesn't care. But, oh dear father, there is more to tell. Yesterday, the Shrewsbury Weekly Times came, and in the Blair notes it told all about the fire at the doctor's and said it had been fortunately discovered in time by Miss Emily Starr. I can't tell you what I felt like when I saw my name in the paper. I felt famous, and I never was called Miss in earnest before. Last Saturday, Aunt Elizabeth and Aunt Laura went to Shrewsbury for the day and left Cousin Jimmy and me to keep house. We had such fun, and Cousin Jimmy let me skim all the milk pans, but after dinner, unexpected company came, and there was no cake in the house, and that was a dreadful thing. It never happened before at New Moon. Aunt Elizabeth had toothache all day yesterday, and Aunt Laura was away at Priest Pond visiting Great Aunt Nancy, so no cake was made. I prayed about it, and then I went to work and made a cake by Aunt Laura's secret recipe. And it turned out all right. Cousin Jimmy helped me set the table and get supper, and I poured the tea and never slopped any over the saucers. You would have been proud of me, Father. Mrs. Lewis took a second piece of cake, and I said I would know Elizabeth Murray's cake, if I found it in Central Africa. And I said not a word for the honor of the family, but I felt very proud. I had saved the Murrays from disgrace. When Aunt Elizabeth came home and heard the tale, she looked grim and tasted a piece that was left, and then she said, "Well, I guess you do have some Murray in you." That is the first time Aunt Elizabeth has ever praised me. She had 3 teeth out, so they will not ache any more, and I'm glad for her sake. Before I went to bed, I got the cookbook, and I picked out all the things I'd like to make. Queen pudding, seafoam sauce, black-eyed Susans, pigs in blankets. They sound just lovely. I can see such beautiful fluffy white clouds over Lofty John's bush. I wish I could soar up and drop right into them. I can't believe they would be wet and messy like Teddy says. Teddy cut my initials and his together on the monarch of the forest, but somebody has cut them out. I don't know whether it was Perry or Ilse. Miss Brownwell hardly ever gives me good deportment marks now, and Aunt Elizabeth is much displeased on Friday nights, but Aunt Laura understands. I wrote an account of the afternoon when Miss Brownwell made fun of my poems and put it in an envelope, and wrote Aunt Elizabeth's name on it and put it among my papers. If I die of consumption, Aunt Elizabeth will find it and know the rights of it and mourn that she was so unjust to me. But I don't think I will die because I'm getting much fatter, and Elise told me she heard her father tell Aunt Laura I would be handsome if I had more color. Is it wrong to want to be handsome, dear father? Aunt Elizabeth says it is, and when I said to her, well, wouldn't you like to be handsome, Aunt Elizabeth seemed annoyed about something. Miss Brownwell has a spite at Perry ever since that evening and treats him very mean, but he's meek and he says he won't kick up a fuss in school because he wants to learn and get ahead. He keeps saying his rhymes are as good as mine, and I know they're not, and it exasperates me. If I do not pay attention all the time in school, Miss Brownwell says, well, I suppose you're composing poetry, Emily. And then everybody laughs at me. Well, not everybody. I mustn't exaggerate. Teddy and Perry and Elise and Jenny never laugh. It's funny that I like Jenny so well now, and I hated her so much that first day. Her eyes aren't piggy at all. They're small, but they're jolly and twinkly. She's quite popular in school. I do hate Frank Banker, though. He took my new reader and wrote in it a big sprawly all the way over the front page. Steal not this book for fear of shame, for on it is the owner's name. And when you die, the Lord will say, where is that book you stole away? And when you say you do not know, the Lord will say, go down below. That's not a refined poem, and besides, it's not the right way to speak about God. I tore out the leaf and burned it, and Aunt Elizabeth was angry, and even when I explained why her wrath was not appeased, Ilse says she's going to call God Allah after this, and I think it's a nicer name myself, and it's so soft and it doesn't sound so stern, but I fear it's not religious enough. Yesterday was my birthday, dear Father. It will soon be a year since I've come to New Moon. I feel as if I've always lived here. I have grown 2 inches. Cousin Jimmy measured me by a mark on the dairy door. My birthday was very nice. Aunt Laura made a lovely cake and gave me a beautiful new white petticoat with an embroidered flounce. She had run a blue ribbon through it, but Aunt Elizabeth made her pull it out, and Aunt Laura also gave me that piece of pink satin brocade in her bureau dresser. I have longed for it ever since I saw it, but I never hoped to possess it. Ilse asked me what I meant to do with it, but I don't mean to do anything with it, only keep it up here in the garret with my treasures and look at it. Because it's so beautiful. Aunt Elizabeth gave me a dictionary. It was a useful present. I feel I ought to like it. You'll soon notice an improvement in my spelling, I hope. The only trouble is, when I'm writing something interesting, I get too excited. It's just awful to have to stop and hunt up a word to see how it's spelled. I looked up ween in it, and Miss Brownwell was right. I did not know what it really meant. It rhymes so well with sheen, and I thought it meant to behold. But I now see, but it means to think. Cousin Jimmy gave me a big, thick, blank book. I'm so proud of it. It will be so nice to write in. But I'll still use the letter bills to write to you, dear Father, because I can fold each one up by itself and address it like a real letter. Teddy gave me a picture of myself. He painted it in watercolors and called it the Smiling Girl. I look as if I was listening to something that made me very happy. Ilse says it flatters me. It does make me better looking than I am, but not any better looking than I would be if I had a bang. Teddy said he's going to paint a real big picture of me when he grows up. Perry walked all the way to Shrewsbury to get me a necklace of pearl beads, and he lost it. He had no more money, so he went home to Stovepipe Town and got a young hen from his Aunt Tom and gave me that. He's a very persistent boy. I am to have all the eggs and the hen lays to sell the peddler for myself. Ilse gave me a box of candy. I'm only going to eat 1 piece a day to make it last a long time. I wanted Ilse to eat some, but she said she wouldn't because it would be mean to help eat a present you had given. And I insisted, and then we fought over it. And Ilse said I was caterwauling. And I didn't know enough to come in when it rained, and I said I knew enough to have some manners at least. Ilse got so mad she went home, but she cooled off soon and came back for supper. It's raining tonight, and it sounds like fairies' feet dancing over the garret roof. If it had not rained, Teddy was going to come down and help me look for the lost diamond. Wouldn't it be splendid if we could find it? Cousin Jimmy's fixing up the garden. He lets me help him, and I have a little flower bed of my own. I always run out first thing every morning to see how much the things have grown since yesterday. Spring is such a happifying time, isn't it, Father? The little blue people are out all around the summer house. That's what Cousin Jimmy calls the violets. And I think it's lovely. He has names like that for all the flowers, and the roses are the queens, and the June lilies are the snow ladies, and the tulips are the gay folk, and the daffodils are the golden ones, and the china asters are my pink friends. Mike, too, is here with me, sitting on the windowsill. Mike is a smee cat. Smee is not in the dictionary. It's a word I invented myself. I could not think of any English word which just describes Mike II, so I made this up. It means sleek and glossy and soft and fluffy all in one, and something else besides that I can't quite express. Aunt Laura is teaching me to sew. She says I must learn to make a hem on muslin, and I can't be seen. That can't be seen because it's tradition. I hope she will teach me how to make point lace someday. All the Murrays of New Moon have been noted for making point lace. I mean all the women Murrays. None of the girls in school can do it. Aunt Laura says she will make me a point lace handkerchief when I get married. All the New Moon brides had point lace handkerchiefs, except my mother who ran away, but you didn't mind her not having one, did you, Father? Aunt Laura talks a good bit about my mother to me, but not when Aunt Elizabeth is around. Aunt Elizabeth never mentions her name. Aunt Laura wants to show me Mother's room, but she has never been able to find the key because Aunt Elizabeth keeps it hidden. Aunt Laura says Aunt Elizabeth loved my mother very much. You'd think she would love her daughter some, wouldn't you? But she doesn't. She's just bringing me up as a duty. First, dear Father, this has been a very important day. I wrote my first letter. I mean the first letter that was really to go in the mail. It was to Great Aunt Nancy, who lives at Priest Pond, and she's very old, and she wrote to Aunt Elizabeth and said, I might write now and then to a poor old woman. My heart was touched, and I wanted to. Aunt Elizabeth said we might as well let her, and she said to me, you must be careful to write a nice letter, and I will read it over when it's written. If you make a good impression on Aunt Nancy, she may do something for you. I wrote the letter very carefully, but it didn't sound a bit like me when it was finished. I couldn't write a good letter when I knew Aunt Elizabeth was going to read it. I felt paralyzed. June 7th. Dear Father, my letter did not make a good impression on Great Aunt Nancy. She did not answer it, but she wrote Aunt Elizabeth that I must be very stupid to write such a stupid letter. I feel insulted because I'm not stupid. Perry says he feels like he's going to Priest Pond and knock in the daylights at a Great Aunt Nancy. I told him he must not talk like that about my family, and anyhow, I don't see how knock in the daylights out of Great Aunt Nancy would make her change her opinion about me being stupid. I have 3 cantos of The White Lady finished. I have the heroine immured into a convent. I don't know how to get her out because I'm not a Catholic. I suppose it would have been better if I had a Protestant heroine, but there are no Protestants in the days of chivalry. I might have asked Lofty John last year, but this year I can't because I've never spoken to him since he played that horrid joke on me about the apple. When I met him on the road, I looked straight ahead as Lofty John, just as lofty as he is. I have called my pig after him to get square. Cousin Jimmy has given me a little pig for my own. When it's sold, I'm to have the money. I mean to give some to the missionaries and put the rest in the bank to go to my education. And I thought if I ever had a pig, I would call it Uncle Wallace. But now it doesn't seem proper for me to call pigs after your uncles, even if you don't like them. Teddy and Perry and Elise and I were playing Living in the Days of Chivalry, and Elise and I are distressed damsels, rescued by gallant knights. Teddy made a splendid suit of armor out of old barrel staves, and then Perry made a better one out of old tin boilers, hammered flat with a broken saucepan for a helmet. Sometimes we play at the Tansy Patch. I have a funny feeling that Teddy's mother hates me this summer. Last summer, she just didn't like me. Smoke and Buttercup are not there now. They've disappeared mysteriously in the winter. Teddy says he feels sure his mother poisoned them because she thought he was getting too fond of them. Teddy's teaching me to whistle, but Aunt Laura says it's unladylike. So many jolly things seem to be unladylike. Sometimes I almost wish my aunts were infidels like Dr. Burnley. He never bothers whether Ilsa is ladylike or not. But no, it would not be good manners to be an infidel. It would not be a New Moon tradition. Today I taught Perry that he must not eat with his knife. He wants to learn all the rules of etiquette, and I am helping him learn a recitation for school examination day. I want Ilsa to do it, but she was mad because he asked me first, so she wouldn't. But she should because she's a far better reciter than I am. I am too nervous. June 14th. Dear Father, we have composition in school now, and I learned today that you put things in like this, quotation marks, when you write anything anybody has said. I didn't know that before. I must go over all my letters to you and put them in. And after a question, you must put a mark like this, a question mark. And when a letter is left out of apostrophe, which is a comma up in the air, Miss Bramwell is sarcastic, but she does teach you things, I must say. And I'm putting that down because I want to be fair, even if I do hate her. And she is interesting, although she's not nice. I've written a description of her on a letter bill. I like writing about people I don't like better than about those I do like. Aunt Laura is nicer to live with than Aunt Elizabeth, but Aunt Elizabeth is nicer to write about. I can describe her faults, but I feel wicked and ungrateful if I say anything that's not complimentary about dear Aunt Laura. Aunt Elizabeth has locked your books away, and she says I'm not to have them until I'm grown up. Just as if I wouldn't be careful with them, dear father. She says I wouldn't, because she found that when I was reading one of them, I put a tiny pencil dot under every beautiful word. It didn't hurt the book a bit, dear father. Some of the words were dingles, pearled, musk, dappled, intervals, glen, bosky, piping, shimmer, crisp, beechen, ivory. I think those are all lovely words, Father. June 25th. Dear Father, there's been a dark shadow over this day. I dropped my scent in church. It made a dreadful noise. I felt as if everybody looked at me. Aunt Elizabeth was very annoyed. Perry dropped his too soon after. He told me after church did it on purpose because he thought it would make me feel better, but it didn't because I was afraid that people would think it was me dropping mine again. Boys do such weird things. I hope the minister didn't hear because I'm beginning to like him. I never liked him much before last Tuesday. His family are all boys, and I suppose he doesn't understand little girls very well. Then he called it New Moon. Aunt Laura and Aunt Elizabeth were both away, and I was at the kitchen alone. Mr. Dare came in and sat down on Saucy Sal, who was asleep in the rocking chair. He was comfortable, but Saucy Sal sure wasn't. He didn't sit on her stomach. If he had, I suppose he would have killed her. He just sat on her legs. Sal yowled, but Mr. Dare is a little deaf and didn't hear her, and I was too shy to tell him. But Cousin Jimmy came in just as he was asking me if I knew my catechism, and said, "Catechism, is it? Lawful heart, man, listen to that poor dumb beast. Get up if you're a Christian." So Mr. Dare got up and said, "Dear me, this is very remarkable. I thought I felt something moving." When Mr. Dare finished asking me questions, I thought it was my turn, and I would ask him about some things I've wanted to know for years. I asked him if he thought God was very particular about every little thing I did, and if he thought my cats would go to heaven. He said he hoped I never did wrong things and that animals had no souls. And I asked him why we shouldn't put new wine in old bottles, and Aunt Elizabeth does with her dandelion wine, and the old bottles do just as well as new ones. And he explained quite kindly that the Bible bottles were made of skins and got rotten when they were old. It made it quite clear to me, and then I told him that I was worried because I knew I ought to love God better than anything, but there were things I loved better than God. And he said, "What things, child?" And I said, "Flowers and stars and the Wind Woman and the Three Princesses and things like that." And he smiled and said, "Oh, but those are just parts of God, Emily. Every beautiful thing is." And all at once I liked him ever so much, and I didn't feel shy with him anymore, and he preached a sermon on heaven last Sunday. It seemed like a dull place. I think it must be more exciting than that. I wonder what I will do when I go to heaven since I can't sing. I wonder if they'll let me write poetry. But I think church is interesting. Aunt Elizabeth and Aunt Laura always read their Bibles before the service begins, but I like to stare around and see everybody and wonder what they're thinking about. It's so nice to hear the silk dresses swishing up the aisles. Bustles are very fashionable right now. But Aunt Elizabeth will not wear them. I think Aunt Elizabeth would look funny with a bustle. Aunt Laura wears a very little one. Your lovingest daughter, Emily B. Starr. P.S. Dear Father, it is lovely to write to you, but oh, I never get an answer back. All right. Chapter 18, Father Cassidy. Consternation resigned at New Moon. Everybody was desperately unhappy. Aunt Laura cried. Aunt Elizabeth was so cantankerous that there was no living with her. Cousin Jimmy went about as one distracted, and Emily gave up worrying about Elsa's mother and Silas Lee's remorseful ghost after she went to bed and worried about this new trouble. For it had all originated in her disregard of New Moon tradition and making calls on Lofty John, and Aunt Elizabeth did not mince matters in telling her so. If she, Emily Bird Starr, had never gone to Lofty John, she would never have eaten the big sweet apple, and if she had never eaten the big sweet apple, Lofty John would not have played a joke on her, and if he had not played a joke on her, Aunt Elizabeth would never have gone and said bitter, Murray-like things to him. And if that hadn't happened, Lofty John would not have become offended and vengeful. And if Lofty John had not become offended and vengeful, he would never have taken it into his lofty head to cut down the beautiful grove to the north of New Moon. For this was exactly where this House the Jack Belt progression had landed them all. Lofty John had announced publicly in the Blairwater blacksmith shop that he was going to cut down the bush as soon as harvest was over. Every last tree and sapling was to be laid low. The news was promptly carried to New Moon and upset the inhabitants thereof, as they had not been upset for years. In their eyes, it was nothing short of a catastrophe. Elizabeth and Laura could hardly bring themselves to believe it. The thing was incredible. That big, thick, protecting bush of spruce and hardwood had always been there. It belonged to New Moon morally. Even Lofty John Sullivan would not dare to cut it down, but Lofty John had an uncomfortable reputation for doing what he said he would do, and that was a part of his loftiness. And if he did, New Moon will be ruined, wailed poor Aunt Laura. It will look dreadful. All of its beauty will go. And we will be left open to the north wind and the sea storms, and we've always been so warm and sheltered here, and Jimmy's garden will be ruined as well. This is what comes of bringing Emily here, says Aunt Elizabeth. Oh, it was a cruel thing to say. Even when all allowances were made, cruel and unjust, since her own sharp tongue and Murray's sarcasm had quite as much to do with it as Emily. But she said it, and it pierced Emily to the heart, with a pang that left a scar for years. Poor Emily did not feel as if she needed any additional anguish. She was already feeling so wretched that she could not eat or sleep. Elizabeth Murray, angry and unhappy as she was, slept soundly at nights, but beside her in the darkness, afraid to move or turn, lay a slender little creature whose tears, stealing silently down her cheeks, could not ease her breaking heart. For Emily thought her heart was breaking. She couldn't go on living and suffering like this. Nobody could. Emily had lived long enough at New Moon for it to get pretty thoroughly into her blood. Perhaps it had even been born there. At any rate, when she came to, she fitted into its atmosphere as a hand into a glove. She loved it as well as if she had lived there her whole short life. Loved every stick and stone and tree, every nail in the old kitchen floor, every cushion of green moss on the dairy roof, every pink and white columbine that grew in the old orchard, every tradition of its history. To think of its beauty being in a large measure reft from it was agony to her. Oh, Lofty John had chosen and timed his vengeance well. When would the blow fall? Every morning Emily listened miserably as she stood on the sandstone doorstep of the kitchen for the sound of axe blows on the clear September air. Every evening when she returned from school, she dreaded to see that the work of destruction had begun. She pined and fretted. There were times when it seemed to her she couldn't bear her life any longer. Every day Aunt Elizabeth said something, inputting the whole blame to her, and the child grew morbidly sensitive about it. Almost she wished Lofty John would begin and just be done with it. If Emily had ever heard the classic story of Damocles, she would have heartily sympathized with him. If she had any hope that it would do any good, she would have swallowed Murray pride and Star pride and every other kind of pride, and gone on her knees to Lofty John to entreat him, to hold his vengeful hand. But she believed it would not. Lofty John had left no doubt in anybody's mind as to his bitter determination in the matter. There was much talk about it in Blairwater, and some were very well pleased at this blow to New Moon pride and prestige, as some held that it was low and unclean behavior on Lofty John's part, and all agreed that this was what they had prophesied all along as bound to happen someday, when the old Murray Sullivan feud of 3 generations should have come to its inevitable head. The only surprising thing was that Lofty John hadn't done it long ago. He had always hated Elizabeth Murray since their school days. One day by the bank of Blairwater, Emily had sat down and wept. She had been sent to trim the dead blossoms off the rose bushes on Grandmother Murray's grave. Having finished her task, she had not the heart to go back to the house. I can't bear it. I can't bear it, sobbed Emily to the rose bushes. A few late roses nodded at her. The wind woman combed and waved and stirred the long green grasses on the graves. Where proud Murrays, men and women, slept calmly, unstirred by old feuds and passions. The September sunlight shone beyond the old harvest fields, mellowingly bright and serene and very softly against its green shrub-hung bank, purring and lapping at the blue Blair water. "I don't see why God doesn't stop Lofty John," said Emily passionately. "Surely the New Moon Murrays had a right to expect that much from Providence." Teddy came whistling down the pasture, the notes of his tune blowing across the Blair water like elven drops of sound. "What's the matter?" he said. "Everything's the matter," said Emily. Teddy had no business to be looking so cheerful. She was used to more sympathy from Teddy, and it aggravated her not to find it. "Don't you know Lofty John is going to begin cutting down the bush Monday?" Teddy nodded. "Yeah, Ilsa told me, but look here, Emily, I've thought of something. Lofty John wouldn't dare cut down that bush if the priest told him not to, would he?" "Why?" "Because the Catholics have to do just what the priest tells them to, haven't they?" I don't know anything about them. We are Presbyterians." Emily gave her head a little toss. Mrs. Kent was known to be an English church woman, and though Teddy went to the Presbyterian Sunday school, the fact gave him scanty standing among the bred and the bones Presbyterian circles. "If your Aunt Elizabeth went to Father Cassidy at Whitecross and asked him to stop Lofty John, maybe he'd do it," persisted Teddy. "Aunt Elizabeth would never do that," said Emily positively. "I'm sure of it. She's too proud." "Not even to save the bush?" "Not even for that." "Then I guess nothing can be done." "Look here, see what I've made. This is a picture of Lofty John in purgatory with 3 little devils sticking red-hot pitchforks into him. I copied some of it out of Mother's books, Dante's Infernal, I think it was, but I put Lofty John in place of the man in the book. You can have it." "I don't want it." Emily uncoiled her legs and got up. She was past the stage where inflicting imaginary torments on Lofty John could comfort her. She had already slain him in several agonizing ways during her night vigils, but an idea had come to her, a daring, breathless idea. "I must go home now, Teddy. It's supper time." Teddy pocketed his despised sketch, which was really a wonderful bit of work, if either of them had had the sense to know it. The expression of anguish in Lofty John's face as the merry little devil touched him up with a pitchfork would have been the despair of many a trained artist. Emily went home with a determined twist to her mouth. She ate as much supper as she could, which wasn't much, for Aunt Elizabeth's face would have destroyed her appetite if she had any, and then sneaked out of the house by the front door. Cousin Jimmy was working in his garden, but he did not call her. Cousin Jimmy was always very sorrowful now. Emily stood on a moment in the Grecian porch and looked at Lofty John's bush, green-bosomed, waving all lovely. Would it be a desecrated waste of stumps by Monday night? Goaded by the thought, Emily cast fear and hesitation to the winds, and started briskly off down the lane. When she reached the gate, she turned to the left of the long red road of mystery that ran up the Delectable Mountain. She had never been on that road before. It ran straight to Whitecross. Emily was going to the parish house there to interview Father Cassidy. It was 2 miles to Whitecross, and Emily walked it all too soon. She'd been trying to think what she should say, how she should say it, but her invention failed her. She had no acquaintance with Catholic priests and couldn't imagine how you should talk to them at all. They were even more mysterious and knowable than ministers. Suppose Father Cassidy should be dreadfully angry at her for daring to come there and ask a favor. Perhaps it was a dreadful thing to do from every point of view. And very likely it would do no good. Very likely Father Cassidy would refuse to interfere with Lofty John, who was a good Catholic, while she was, in his opinion, a heretic. But for any chance, even the faintest, of averting the calamity impending over New Moon, Emily would have faced the entire Sacred College. Although Emily had never been to Whitecross, she knew the parish house when she saw it. A fine tree-embowered residence near a big white chapel with a fishing gilt cross on its spear, and the 4 gilt angels, one on each of the little spears at the corners. Emily thought them very beautiful as they gleamed in the light of the lowering sun, and wished she could have some of that plain white church at Blairwater. She couldn't understand why Catholics could have all the angels, but there was not time to puzzle over this. Is Father Cassidy at home? Asked Emily rather jerkily. Yes, he is. Can I see him? Come in, said the little maid that answered the door. Evidently there was no difficulty about seeing Father Cassidy, no mysterious ceremonies such as Emily had half expected, even if she were allowed to see him at all. She was shown into a book-lined room and left there, while the maid went to call Father Cassidy, who, she said, was working in the garden. That sounded quite natural and encouraging. If Father Cassidy worked in a garden, he couldn't be that terrible. Emily looked about her curiously. She was in a very pretty room with cozy chairs and pictures and flowers. Nothing alarming or uncanny about it, except a huge black cat who was sitting at the top of one of the bookcases. It was really an enormous creature. And then came in Father Cassidy with the friendliest smile in the world. Emily took him in with her level glance, as was her habit or gift, and never again in the world was she the least bit afraid of Father Cassidy. He was big and broad-shouldered, with brown eyes and brown hair, and his face was so deeply tanned from his inveterate habit of going about bareheaded in merciless sunshine that it was brown too. Emily thought he looked just like a big nut, a big, brown, wholesome nut. Father Cassidy looked at her as he shook hands. Emily had one of her visitations of beauty just then. Excitement had brought the wild rose hue to her face. The sunlight brought out the watered skin gloss of her black hair. Her eyes were softly dark and limpid, but it was her ears Father Cassidy suddenly bent to look. "She's got pointed ears," said Father Cassidy, in a thrilling whisper. "Pointed ears. I knew she came straight from a fairyland the moment I saw her. Sit down, elf, if elves do sit. Sit down and give me the latest news." Emily's foot was now on her native earth. Father Cassidy talked her languages, and he talked it in such a mellow, throaty voice, slurring his oofs ever so slightly, it became a proper Irishman. But she shook her head a little sadly with the burden of her errand on her soul that she couldn't play the part of ambassadress of Elfland. "I'm only Emily Starr of New Moon," she said, and then gasped hurriedly. "And I'm a Protestant." "And a very nice little Protestant you are," said Father Cassidy. "But for sure I'm a bit disappointed. I'm used to Protestants. The woods hereabouts are full of them, but it's been 100 years since the last elf came to call on me." Emily stared. Surely Father Cassidy wasn't 100 years old. He didn't look more than 50. Perhaps, though, Catholic priests did live longer than other people. She didn't know. "I see you have a cat," she said. "Wrong." Father Cassidy shook his head. "A cat has me." Emily gave up trying to understand him. He was nice but ununderstandable. She let it go at that. She must get on with her errand. "You're a kind of minister, aren't you?" She didn't know whether Father Cassidy would like being called a minister. "Kind of," he agreed. "And you see, ministers and priests can't do their own swearing. They have to keep the cats to do it for them. I never knew any cat that could swear as genteelly and effectively as the Bai." "Is that what you call him?" asked Emily. "That's what he calls himself. My mother doesn't like him because he steals the cream. Now, I don't mind him doing that, no. It's his way of licking his jaws after it. I can't stand that." "Oh, Bai, we're a fairy calling on us. Be excited for once, I implore you. There's a duck of a cat." The Bai refused to be excited. He winked an insolent eye at Emily, and Emily had no idea what the priest was talking about. "Have you any idea what goes on in the head of a cat elf?" What weird questions Father Cassidy asked, yet Emily thought she would like his questions if she wasn't so worried. Suddenly, Father Cassidy leaned across the table and said, "Now what's bothering you?" "I'm so unhappy," said Emily. "Oh, so are lots of other people. Everybody's unhappy in spells, but creatures who have pointed ears shouldn't be unhappy. It's only mortals who should be unhappy." "Oh, please, please, Father. Please, Father Cassidy, I'm in such trouble, and I've come to ask a great favor of you." Emily told him the whole tale from beginning to end. The old Murray Sullivan feud, her erstwhile friendship with Lofty John, the big sweet apple, the unhappy consequence, and Lofty John's threatened revenge. The Bai and Father Cassidy listened with equal gravity until she had finished. Then the Bai winked at her, and Father Cassidy put his long brown fingers together. He said. That's the first time, reflected Emily, that I've ever heard anyone outside of a book say, said Father Cassidy again, "and you want me to put a stop to this nefarious deed?" "Well, if you can," said Emily. "Oh, it would be so splendid if you could. Will you?" Father Cassidy fitted his fingers more carefully together. "I'm afraid I can hardly invoke the power. to prevent Lofty John from disposing as he wishes of his own lawful property, you know. Emily didn't understand the allusion to the keys, but she did understand that Father Cassidy was declining to bring the lever of the church to bear on Lofty John. There was no hope. She could not keep the tears of disappointment out of her eyes. "Oh, come now, darling, don't cry," implored Father Cassidy. "Elves never cry, they can't. It will break my heart to discover you weren't of the green folk. You may call yourself a new moon, and of any religion you like, but the fact remains that you belong to the golden age and of the old gods. And that's why I must save your precious bit of greenwood for you." Emily stared at him. "I think it can be done," Father Cassidy went on. "I think if I go to Lofty John and have a heart-to-heart talk with him, I can make him see reason." "Lofty John and I are very good friends. He's a reasonable man if you know how to take him, which means to flatter his vanity judiciously. I'll put it to him, not as priest to parishioner, but as man to man, that no decent Irishman carries on a feud with women, that no sensible person is going to destroy for nothing, but begrudge those fine old trees that have taken half a century to grow and can never be replaced. Why, the man who cuts down such a tree, except when it's really necessary, should be hanged as high as Haman on a gallows made from the wood of it." Emily thought she should write that last sentence of Father Cassidy's down in Cousin Jimmy's black book when she got home. "But I won't say that to Lofty John," concluded Father Cassidy. "Yes, Emily of New Moon, I think we can consider it a settled thing that your bush will not be cut down." Suddenly, Emily felt very happy. Somehow she had entire confidence in Father Cassidy. She was sure he would twist Lofty John around his little finger. "Oh, I can't thank you enough," she said earnestly. "That's true, so don't waste your breath trying. Now tell me things. Are there any more of you, and how long have you been yourself?" "Well, I'm 12 years old, and I haven't any brothers or sisters, and I think I'd better be going home." "Oh, not till you've had a bite of lunch," she said. "Oh, thank you, I've had my supper. 2 hours ago, and a 2-mile walk since, don't tell me. I'm sorry I haven't any nectar, such food as elves eat, and not even a saucer of moonshine, but my mother makes the best plum cake of any woman on P.E. Island." When Father Cassidy came back, his mother came with him, carrying a tray. Emily had expected to see her big and brown too, but she was the tiniest woman imaginable, with snow-white silky hair and mild blue eyes. "Isn't she the sweetest thing?" "In the way of mothers," asked Father Cassidy. "I keep her to look at, of course. There's something odd about her. I know that woman to stop right in the middle of housekeeping and go off and spend an afternoon in the woods. Like yourself, I'm thinking she has some truck with fairies." Miss Cassidy smiled, kissed Emily, and said she must go finish her preserving, and trotted off. "Now you sit right down here, Elf, and be human for 10 minutes, and we'll have a friendly snack." Emily was hungry, a nice comfortable feeling that she hadn't experienced for a fortnight. Mrs. Cassidy's plum cake was all her reverend son claimed, and the cream cow seemed to be no myth. "What do you think of me now?" asked Father Cassidy suddenly, finding Emily's eyes fixed on him. "I think you're awfully good," she said. "Oh, I am awfully good," agreed Father Cassidy. "I'm so good that I'll do what you want me to do, for I feel there's something else you want me to do." "I'm in a scrape, and I've been in it all summer. You see, I'm a poetess," said Emily. "Holy Mike, that is serious. I don't know if I can do much for you. However, how long have you been that way?" "Are you making fun of me?" asked Emily. Father Cassidy swallowed something besides plum cake. "The saints forbid. It's only that I'm rather overcome. To be after entertaining a lady of New Moon and an elf and a poetess all in one is a bit too much for a humble priest like me. Have another slice of cake and tell me all about it." "It's like this," she said. "I'm writing an epic." Father Cassidy suddenly leaned over and gave Emily's wrists a little pinch. "I just want to see if you were real," he explained. Yes, you're writing an epic. Go on. I think I've got my second wind now. "I began it last spring. I called it The White Lady at first, but now I've changed it to Child of the Sea. Do you think that's a better title?" "Much better. I've got 3 cantos done, and I can't get any further because there's something I don't know and I can't find out." "What is it?" "My epic," said Emily, "is about a very beautiful high-born girl who was stolen away from her real parents when she was a baby and brought up in a woodcutter's hut." "Ah. One of the 7 original plots in the world," murmured Father Cassidy. "What? Nothing. It's just a habit of thinking out loud. Go on." "She had a lover of high degree, but his family did not want him to marry her because she was only a woodcutter's daughter." Another of the 7 plots, excuse me. So they sent him away to the Holy Land on a crusade, and word came back that he was killed. And then Edithina, that's her name, Editha, went into a convent. Emily paused for a bite of plum cake, and Father Cassidy took up the strain. And now her lover comes back very much alive, though covered with scars, and the secret of her birth is discovered through the dying confession of the old nurse and the birthmark on her arm. How did you know? Gasped Emily. Oh, I guessed it. I'm a good guesser. I don't know how to get out of the convent, confessed Emily. I thought perhaps you'd know how it could be done. Again, Father Cassidy fitted his fingers. Let's see now. It's no light matter you've undertaken, young lady. How stands the case? Editha has taken the veil not because she has a religious vocation, but because she imagines her heart is broken. The Catholic Church does not release its nuns from their vows because they happen to think they've made a mistake of that sort. Is this woman the sole child of her real parents? Yes. Okay, then the way is clear. If she had any brothers or sisters, she would have to kill them off, which is a messy thing to do. Well then, she's the sole daughter and heiress of a noble family who have for years been at deadly feud with another noble family, the family of the lover. Do you know what the feud is? Of course, I've got all that in the poem already. So much the better. This feud has rent the kingdom in twain and can only be healed by an alliance between Capulet and Montague. Those aren't their names, said Emily. No matter. This, then, is a national affair with far-reaching issues. Therefore, an appeal to the Supreme Pontiff is quite in order. What you want is a dispension from Rome. Dispension's a hard word to work into a poem, said Emily. Undoubtedly, agreed Father Cassidy. Okay, I think I'll be able to work it in, said Emily cheerfully, and I'm so much obliged to you. You don't know what a relief it is to my mind. I'll finish the poem right now in a few weeks. I haven't done a thing in it all summer. But then, of course, I've been busy. Elise Burnsley and I have been making a new language. Excuse me, did you say language? Yes. What's the matter with English? Isn't it good enough for you? Oh, yes. That isn't why we're making a new one. You see, in the spring, Cousin Jimmy got a lot of French boys to help plant the potatoes. I had to help, too, and Elise came to keep me company. And it was so annoying to hear those boys talking French when we couldn't understand a word of it. And so they did it just to make us mad. It'll be great fun. Oh, I haven't a doubt, but 2 girls who will go to all the trouble of inventing a new language just to get square with some poor little French boys. You're beyond me, said Father Cassidy helplessly. Goodness knows what you'll be doing when you grow up. You'll be red revolutionaries. I tremble for Canada. Oh, it isn't trouble, it's fun, and all the girls in school are just wild because they hear us talking it and they can't make it out. We can talk secrets right before them. Human nature being what it is, I can see where the fun comes in all right. Let's hear a sample of your language. Not millen o stay dolmen, boat a Shrewsbury, furnace tapulatino, said Emily Gibley. That means next summer I'm going to Shrewsbury Woods to pick strawberries. I yelled that across the playground to Elise the other day, or Elsa the other day, at recess, and oh, how everybody stared. Staring, is it? I should say so. My own poor eyes are all but dropping out of my head. Let's hear a bit more. Motrel le did sib li motrine. Mobertrel sep mo dastended. A ting cetera. That means my father's dead and so is my mother. My grandfather and grandmother have been dead a long time. We haven't invented a word for dead yet. I think I will soon be able to write my poems in our language, and then Aunt Elizabeth will not be able to read them if she finds them. Have you written any other poetry? Oh yes, but just short ones. Would you be so kind as to let me hear one of them? Emily was greatly flattered, and she did not mind letting Father Cassidy hear her precious stuff. I'll recite my last poem, she said, clearing her throat. Father Cassidy listened attentively after the first verse change came over his big brown face, and he began patting his fingertips together. When she finished, she hung down her lashes and waiting tremblingly. What if Father Cassidy said it was no good? No, he wouldn't be so impolite, but if he bantered her as he had done about her epic, she would know what that meant. Father Cassidy did not speak all at once. The prolonged suspense was so terrible. All at once her evening dream seemed trash, and she wondered how she could have ever been silly enough to repeat it to Father Cassidy. Of course it was trash. She was 12 years old. Father Cassidy knew that well enough. All the same, for a child like this, and rhyme and rhythm were flawless, and there was one line, just one line, the light of faintly golden stars. For the sake of that line, Father Cassidy suddenly said, Keep on writing poetry. You mean? Emily was breathless. I mean you'll be able to do something by and by. Something I don't know how much, but keep on. Keep on. Emily was so happy she wanted to cry. It was the first word of commendation she had ever received except from her father. And a father might have too high of an opinion of one. This was different. To the end of her struggle for recognition, Emily never forgot Father Cassidy's keep on and the tone with which he said it. Aunt Elizabeth schools me for writing poetry. She says people will think I'm as simple as Cousin Jimmy. The path of genius never did run smooth, but have another piece of cake. Just to show there's something human about you. And then I'll drive you home. Oh, no, that's very kind of you. The English language was quite good enough for Emily now, but I'd rather walk. It's such good exercise. Meaning, said Father Cassidy, that we must keep it from the old lady. Goodbye. And may you always see a happy face in your looking glass. Emily was too happy to be tired on the way home. There seemed to be a bubble of joy in her heart, a shimmering prismatic bubble. When she came to the top of the big hill and looked across the new moon, her eyes were satisfied and loving. How beautiful it was. Lying, embowered in the twilight of the old trees, the tips of the loftiest spruces came out in purple, silhouette against the northwestern sky of rose and amber. Down behind the Blair water, dreamed in silver, the Wind Woman had folded her misty bat wings. Father Cassidy would manage it in some way. She knew everything would be all right. And he had told her to keep on. And that is the end of chapter 17. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you're having a great weekend. And I will see you guys tomorrow with a new vlog. Bye.